Okay, we're recording now. So, as I mentioned, just to review, I think I'm in main. I'm going to work on main first and worry about my strlen next. I'm developing my project in an incremental fashion, just like all your professors have told you to do for all your classes. So I'm going to work just on main first and make sure I can step through and print argv. And to do this, I think I'm going to need two long-lasting registers. So I have set aside and backed up X19 and 20. On my line 12, which is on the left, I have dereferenced argv, putting the results in X20. So X19 holds a pointer to char. That means X20 now holds a pointer to char. After this instruction is executed, X19, which is the pointer to the pointer, is incremented by 8, and it's 8 because that is the size of a pointer. Okay, so now I'm looking for a 0 in X20. So I can compare and branch if 0, X20, and we'll go to, let's say, 2 forward. So at this point, we have a char pointer in X20. And let's put in the 2, and that would be here. All right, so all I want to do is use the print. Now, also, there was a mistake on your format, your line 51. You have .ASCII with to print a char and a new line. And now, if you look at my line 25, you see that inside some brackets, and that's just for printing, inside some brackets, it's going to print an integer and then a string. Okay, so X0, ADR to X0. Prior to this, I would have called my strlen, but we're skipping that for now. And that would be FMT. And X1 is the next thing, and that will be the results of my strlen. So for now, I'll just use 0. So my line 16 is temporary. And I have X20 is the pointer to char, and let's put that in X2. So first argument to printf is the format string, X0. The second argument is an integer, and the third argument is a char pointer. So X0, X1, X2. So let's do that with X20. And now BL to printf and branch backwards to 1 backwards. Okay. So I think this will now printf each of the members of argv and printing a 0 where the results of my strlen will go. So I'm going to write that out, and let's try it. So GCC, and maybe I'm feeling pessimistic, so I'll use the debugging option, the -G, and m.s. All right, let's try it. Okay, let's try it with a lot of 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that part of the program is complete and tested. All right. so let's go back to the editor. And maybe I'll add a new line here. So looking at my code, do you have questions?
So how important was it the dereferencing the argv? Because I know I don't think I did that in my code necessarily. I might have.
No, you didn't. Yeah, you
Um,
didn't do that at all.
so how essential was that?
It was critical, okay, because argv is a pointer to a pointer. So in your code, so remember that x21 has the wrong thing in it,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're trying to dereference x21 as a byte. So you're passing the wrong thing to my strlen also.
Okay.
Okay, so take a look at what I've got here. So x19 is a pointer to a pointer.
Mm-hmm.
And when I dereference a pointer to a pointer, what I get is a pointer. So I removed one level of pointer by dereferencing x19. So x20 is a pointer to char.
Okay.
So it's x20 that's supplying, if you look on line 18, it's x20 that's supplying the address of the string to print.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now I'm going to rough in my strlen, and I got that down here. Now I'm thinking about my strlen, and I realize it's not going to make any function calls. So if I use only the low registers, I don't need
Oh.
to back up anything. Okay, so according to the call convention, according to the calling convention, x0 contains a char star. And once again, with knowing that I am not calling any functions, that this function is self-contained, I don't have to do any backups as long as I use, let's say, x0 through x7.
Okay.
So I'm just going to leave x0, the char star, I'm just going to leave that there. And how about we establish W1, because this is an int function. So we move W1 to 0. So that's our counter. And I'll make a little comment up here. So you notice how I'm sort of making a Bible that tells me what's in what register, and that way I won't forget. So W1 contains counter and must be moved to W0 for the return. Okay, so in fact, right before the return, I'm going to go ahead and do that since I already know I have to do that. So this is creating the return value, move to W0 from W1. Okay, so let's count the number of non-nulls in X0. So I'm going to need a label here, and I'll call that 1. And notice that these temporary labels, you can use them over and over again.
Okay. Yeah, I
And
assumed they didn't. You couldn't.
yeah, well, that's why when you branch to one of these temporary labels, you put in forward or reversed, backwards, forward or backwards. So that way, on line 20, it says branch unconditionally to one backwards. So that means it's not to be confused with one forwards, which would be line 35. Okay, so X0 is a pointer to char. So LDRB into W2, and I can use that without backing it up because these are all scratch registers. 0 through 7 are scratch. And it's coming from X0. That's where the char star is, if you take a look at line 27. And after doing that, I'll increment the pointer by 1.
Okay.
Okay. Then I'll take I want to see if that's a 0 byte or not. So compare and branch if 0. Testing W2. And if it is a 0, branch to 2 forward. And here is where 2 will be. So if it isn't 0, add 1 to W1. And branch unconditionally back to 1 backwards. Okay, well, that's MyStrlen. Now let's call it. We haven't called it yet. And that will be, let's see. Let's call right here. Okay, so X20 has a char star. And it needs to be in X0. So all I need is a move of X20 to X0, and then a branch to the link register, a branch link. So call the function mystrlen. Now what comes back is in W0. So I've got to move that over to W1, and I'll remove line 20. All right, so where were we? Move to W1 from W0, and now eliminate this line. Okay, so X20 is a pointer to a char star, and that is what we need for input to mystrlen. So that's going to X0 so that it can be passed to mystrlen. The results come back in W0, which you can see on line 43. And I need to move W0 to W1 because it's going to be the second argument to printf. The first argument to printf is the format string. And then the third argument to printf is going to be the char star, but that has to be an X2. So that's what is happening on line 21. Okay, so let's write this out and try it. And oops, line 36. Line 36 is a mistake because I have the X0 register trying to go into a W register, and that's not kosher. I just have to replace that X with a W. Write it out. Compile. And let's try the program. Okay. The project is complete. Okay, so having done this, let's take a look at the code again, and then let's talk about a few things from your code. Okay?
Right.
All right. So one of the things that I did that I feel pleased about is I developed this incrementally. I was able to write and debug main without even using my strlen. So I just stubbed it out. And then I came back and finished my strlen when I knew that main was working. So looking at main, lines 8 and 9 and 25 and 26 are preserving and restoring the long-lasting registers that I'm going to use, including X30, which must be backed up because I'll be making function calls. I also took care to write a little story for myself. So X19 is going to hold argv, which is I'll make a little note here, char star star. And then it makes more sense when I document X20 holds a star argv, or essentially argv sub I. Let's say I was an integer variable. So saying argv sub I, that is a dereference of argv. So argv sub I is a char star, and that's what I wanted. Okay, so X19 is char star star. Dereferencing it puts a char star into X20. And then 8 is added to X19, and that's appropriate because X19 is pointing at an array of pointers, and all pointers on this machine are 8 bytes. So is the char star a 0? Because that's what ends the array of argv. So on line 14, I'm looking for that 0 as a char star. And if I find it, I branch to line 26, where I start wrapping myself up and leaving. Okay, so if we didn't branch, that means we get to line 16. So the char star is in X20. To call my strlen, it needs to be in X0. When my strlen returns, its return value is in W0 because it's an int. It's declared as an int. And I know that if you look at the template string, the format string itself will be an X0. And this %D, that's the output of my strlen. So that's got to be in W1. And then X2 will be the char star. And I'm making my cursor go back and forth so you can see that.
Okay.
All right, and that's what line 21 puts the format string address into X0. We already have W1 set up on line 19. Then on line 22, we're putting the char star in X2, calling printf, and branching back to process the next loop. So my strlen follows a similar pattern in that there's a label, an LDRB, and then a compare branch of 0. So it too is also looking for a null terminator. But in this case, rather than advancing 8 bytes at a time, we're looking at chars, so it advances 1 byte at a time. Okay. All right. Now let's take a look at, so there's a few things wrong on your code. One, line 27, X21 in your comment has argv, but no, it has argc. So that was an error. Reciprocally, line 28, your comment says it has argc, but actually no, it has some piece of argv. So that's going to cause a crash. Well, as I'm scanning your code, I noticed that X22 wasn't used in the body of your code. So you can see how it wasn't necessary for the program.
Mhm.
All right, so if I were to modify your code, I know I can remove this line, and this one should be X1. Okay. Now what? Okay, so there's no dereferencing here, and that's a problem. So the X21, which is holding argv, the pointer to the pointer will never be 0 during correct operation. It could become 0 after you've already committed a bug. But if this program's operating correctly, then the pointer to the pointer won't be a 0. Instead, what will be a 0 is what the pointer to the pointer is pointing to. So that's why there's a dereference on line 13. So X19 in my code will never be 0 if the code is working properly. However, dereferencing X19 will lead to a 0 eventually. How you doing?
So because I didn't dereference, I was messing around in an area I shouldn't be when I was looking at stuff.
Oh yeah, that's right. You had an errant pointer. So you were trying to make sense of things that it's not possible to make sense of. Okay, now your line 35 has a direct analog in my code. So your line 35 is but your line 35 is putting the format string in X24, which is incorrect. The format string to printf must be in X0. It's the first argument to printf. Okay. Okay, so there's a bunch of things that went wrong in your main. Let's take a look at your MyStrlen. So first off, these STPs and STR were not necessary because this function calls no other function. Notice in your code, there's no BL instructions.
Yeah.
So you could use, with impunity, the X0 through X7, registers 0 through 7. Okay. Okay. So where do you put? Okay, so X19 is the char star. And line 13 is also an error because that's not dereferencing the char star to a char. What you're looking for is a char that's a 0. So your line 13, which is a mistake, should look something like my line 39. You see that?
Yeah.
So my line 39 is a dereference of the char star. LDRB says byte, so that's putting one char into W2. And you don't have that equivalent of that in your MySTRLEN at all. And those are the main mistakes. So if I were to order in precedence order, the errors that you have is the wheels came off the wagon immediately in main when you mistakenly swapped X0 and X1 for argc and argv. But then next is you didn't have the right dereferencing instructions in main or in MySTRLEN. Okay, so that's your code.
Okay.
Okay, do you have questions?
So like I know I mixed up which one went where from like which register we had which variable in the beginning.
Right, right.
Is the first parameter always going to go in x0 and the other one going in x1?
Yes, exactly. So the nth parameter, where n is 8 or less, will go into the register numbered n-1. So first parameter goes in a 0, second parameter goes in a 1, third parameter goes in a 2, up until the 8th parameter, which goes in a 7. And if you have more than 8 parameters, then you probably could refactor your code. But if you really, really do want more than 8 parameters, you'd have to push them on the stack.
So one thing was I kept on using different variables for everything. So does like the return overwrite what it was in it before it?
Return will overwrite X30.
Okay.
But other than that, return only influences the next instruction to be executed.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll notice that in MySTRLEN, line 44 is setting up the return value to be in a 0 register, then the return.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing is true on my line 28.
He seems excited.
If my dogs see a FedEx or a UPS truck drive by, they get excited. Okay, Fredo. No. Good girl. Come here. Good girl. Yeah, yeah. little tail go wag, wag, wag. Okay, do you have any other questions?
I think that's about it.
Okay. So I had an idea to change my strlen and calculate it a different way without using a counter, but I don't think it would improve the performance any.
Hmm.
Actually, yeah, it will improve the performance. So while we're recording, let me see if I can write another one, another version. So I'll just call it MS for my own version of my strlen. And I'm not even going to use a counter this time, but what I will do is make a copy move of x0. What's in x0? That's the pointer to the string. I'll move that to x1. And then 1 LDRB of W2 from x0, dereferencing x0, adding, no, I'm going to dereference x1 and increment x1. And, ooh, watch this. This will be a lot shorter. So compare and branch not 0 of W2 to 1 back. There's my whole loop now in 2 instructions. So if it is 0, now here's what I did is instead of using a counter, I'm using the address. So let's say the string is only 1 byte. So the address in x1 gets incremented. So now it's 1 away from the original value. And then it compare and branch not 0, it'll go back to 1, and then it gets incremented again. Now it's 2 away, but I know the answer should be 1, so let me subtract. X1, and 1, and move. Okay, now let me subtract again. So subtract x0, x1. And that'll actually be it. I think that would work. Let's try it. So in order to try it, I just need to call MS instead of my strlen. Let's try it just for kicks. Now I know I'm taking at least one liberty. Okay, well I got negative numbers instead of positive numbers, so I just I subtracted in the wrong direction.
Mm.
So let me go back, and that would be here. So make that a 1 and that a 0. Oh yeah, right. Okay, let me write and run it again. Yep. Okay, let me explain my code, my new code. So instead of using a counter, which we did in my strlen, I used the address of the char as the counter. So suppose the original string was address 1000, and I keep a copy in x0, that's where it came in, but I make a copy into X1. So that starts out at 1,000. And I add 1 to it, and I step over the first letter. And the first letter is not 0, so it goes back to line 49. I step over, I go fetch the next character, which means that X1 is a value of 2 greater than X0. You see how I'm using the distance between the 2 pointers as the counter. Yeah, so let's see, how many instructions? So my new code will be much faster than the old code. And the reason for that is inside the loop. Let's say the string was 1,000,000 characters long. Inside the loop, I'm going to execute 4 instructions 1,000,000 times, starting at line 39, going to line 42. But in my new code, if it was 1,000,000 characters, I would execute only 2 instructions times 1,000,000, 49 and 50. So this code would be twice as fast. Yeah. Well, that was fun.
Yeah. Going over this really helps me because like it helps me figure out where I went wrong and then what I can fix in the future. So thank you for doing this with me.
It is my pleasure. And I look forward to great things from you in the future.
Thanks. Well, have a
Okie
good day.
dokie. You too. Okay, bye-bye.